Hello there.
Oh, maybe now it's kicked over, right? Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. I think my volume was down.
Okay, there we go. Okay, let me see if I can make you a co-host. It'll be really sad if nobody shows up because there is like 17 or 18 people registered now. So,
Oh, great. Great, great,
fingers
great.
crossed. Welcome everyone to our Stream Bank Stabilization webinar. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am Sarah Orr, Ag Agent and County Director in Cook County. And with us tonight, we have Dr. Andrea Ludwig, who is a professor in biosystems engineering. And I will let her give a more detailed introduction of exactly what her role is there. And we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for the introduction and for having me this evening. I am really excited to share with you all some thoughts and topics on stream bank stabilization considerations for riparian restoration post Helene. And to give you a little bit of background, I serve as the state stormwater management specialist for UT Extension. I've been in this role for 15 years, and I honestly have been working a lot in stream bank and creek bank repair and stabilization in more of like urban settings where we see our urban streams unraveling because of the land use change around the streams. And with so much urbanization and impervious surface, we see increased flows, and that just wreaks havoc on the stability of creeks and rivers in urban settings. And so it's been really um, exciting and kind of a challenge for me to translate some of the experiences I've had working in urban systems and translate those experiences to working on properties that are riverfront properties in our impacted um, watersheds due to extreme weather, which is what we're here talking today about post Helene. And so, I am excited to talk about this topic kind of from that perspective and share with you a little bit of some of the work we've been doing in the Nolichucky Basin and the Pigeon River Basin as well. And really excited to kind of see where this goes as we continue to tackle some of these challenges that we see persisting through our watersheds, along our waterways, because of this extreme event. So a little bit of terminology to kind of set the tone here. So I'm going to be talking a lot about river systems, about riparian systems, and of course this riparian zone, which is this interface between the land and a body of water. And so I kind of wanted to give us an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about riparian restoration, when we talk about stream banks. So here we kind of see a cross section of a typical river or stream. And you see kind of this in a low flow scenario. And then we see different elevations that are indicated on this cross section, kind of showing us where this bankful elevation is kind of your, 1 to 2 year big event that happens, relatively frequently. And then your flood prone elevation, which is above that, which is our floodplain. So when water accesses that area in a bigger storm. So think about your 10-year storm, your 50-year storm, your 100-year storm. Of course, what we've seen with Helene and some of our more extreme events that we're seeing more frequently, it feels like, of course, we are working in a stage that goes above and beyond that flood-prone elevation as well. So it goes well outside of its floodplain and up into our upland systems. So when I'm talking about riparian restoration, I'm really talking about looking at how we can stabilize these destabilized areas along our stream banks and river banks. And so indicated in pink here, kind of from that low flow, kind of ordinary water line up to up into the floodplain. So how can we work? What are some strategies to help stabilize this area that has experienced just this really massive event recently, really destabilizing events recently, flows, and how can we work in this zone with different strategies to help protect the integrity of our lands, but then also protect the waterways that flow through our watersheds. So, of course, we know that Helene was a generational event. I've talked with my colleagues at TVA and tried to get them to give me some quotes and estimates on what the return period is. And when it comes to these events, we just don't have the observational period of record to really put a number to it. And so they get really kind of a little bit uncomfortable when I try to get them to put a number to it because we only see these, once in a generation. The best they have compared it to is the event. Oh gosh, I'm losing the year now, but I think it was the 1916 event that happened. And again, that's once in a generation, and we've almost skipped a generation there, a couple, it seems like, that have experienced this level of change in the landscape and are experiencing the repercussions of that. And some of the things that we're seeing marked in our landscape as a result are some of these images are probably very familiar to you all. These are all taken in the Nolichucky and French Broad systems. So we're experiencing erosion, of course. So in this picture, we're eroding down to what was an old riverbed. So we're seeing the cobbles that were laid who knows how long ago, thousands of years ago. And now this is the substrate that's at the surface because of the level of erosion that happened. When there's erosion, there's also a counter to that, which is deposition. So that material goes somewhere, and that deposit you see there is a very silty deposit up in the floodplains, up in the uplands. And of course, that's a challenge to us, restoring or using that hay field, that pasture land any further. And then, of course, there was a lot of debris that was moved, woody debris, human debris, all sorts of structures. So just a lot of debris in along the riverbanks that had to be dealt with. And then, kind of a result of all this, we have some subsequent erosion that's happening every time it rains. Now we've got this unstable material. It doesn't have a lot of structure, these deposits. And so we see gullies forming because of subsequent rains that are happening. And so these are all challenges that we're facing in the landscapes, that we're facing in our ag fields, and challenges that we're trying to find solutions to and understand how to deal with the landscape and deal with these challenges to help restore some sense of stability and productivity to the land. So just to zoom in a little bit to give you an idea, this is that picture, and there's one of our students there standing in one of the gullies that was formed and cutting down into the old riverbed. And just for a little bit of more scale there is Hunter. He is not a short gentleman either. So, we see a lot of this sort of deposition and erosion all throughout the watersheds, especially on riverfront property. So a lot of challenges there. So, the landscape, obviously, rivers have been carving and forming different features on the landscapes, for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And so, this process of rivers moving water and sediment, it is what has formed the fertile soils that we enjoy, that we farm, that we utilize, the productive soils that are there. This is the process that has formed those fertile soils. And unfortunately, it's the same process that has really changed the landscape, in some cases, in a lot of cases, taken away that fertile soil and changed the landscape in such a way that we're dealing with these scenarios. So, this process is, rivers are naturally dynamic, and there's been a lot of science and research that has helped us to understand what the relationships are between landscape characteristics and the movement of water to help us understand more about that river dynamics, about sediment transport, and about how we can better understand and be proactive where we see signs of vulnerability. Um, just to give you a little bit of a diagram, this is a conceptual model that came out in the 1950s, actually. This is something called Lane's balance, and it just kind of helps us understand the balance between how water moves through the landscape and that the force and the power of that water that carries the sediment and carries the sand, silts, gravels, all of that aggregate through the system with the force of that water. And you can see that some of the things that are in this relationship as water and sediment try to they have a balance here. More water can move greater sediment, depending upon the slope of the landscape and the stream, and those two sides of the balance can move in or out, and you're going to experience a change in the sediment that moves in the system, whether it's being eroded or being aggraded or deposited in the system. And so it is a very kind of complicated and interesting relationship to think about, but it really just comes down to physics. And of course, in this extreme event in Helene, we had a heck of a lot of water with a heck of a lot of power moving the sediment, moving and sculpting, perhaps in some cases, new channels, different channels, and transporting that material downstream. And as we saw, as we see rivers like the Nolichucky come out of Western North Carolina, where we see really steep terrain, as it hits some of the flatter terrain that we have here in Tennessee in the valleys, we see a lot of that sediment being deposited. So we saw through the river corridor that process happening, steeper terrains, transporting that water, transporting the sediment, a lot of power there. And then when we're finding more floodplains, flatter areas, a lot of that sediment being deposited out. So generally, that's kind of a look at what we're talking about when we're talking about how rivers move sediments and the relation between things like slope and the terrain that interact. So just to give you a little bit of a visual, this is actually the Runyon Farm where we're holding our field day tomorrow, where I've been doing a little bit of work on bank stabilization. This is an aerial image that was provided by a real estate photography company that we're using with permission. And it just showcases everything that we just talked about, how the river was out of its banks, finding flow paths through this floodplain, and it's again kind of above your typical floodplain, kind of through the whole field. We can see areas of scour, of deposition, of vegetation removed completely from the riverbanks. And this is a big bend in the river, so there's quite a bit of energy happening here. So just to give us, one example of the level and the scale of change in the landscape that we're dealing with. And I failed to mention at the beginning of the talk here, since we're a relatively small group, feel free to unmute and I'm sorry, to put questions in the chat, and Sarah's going to field them, and we can answer them as they come up in your mind. So just wanted to put that out there. All right. So the initial response for a lot of properties was, a lot of material was deposited and moved into fields. And so a lot of that material was graded out and moved around to try to reestablish fields, to try to reestablish riverbanks and boundaries. There was a big effort to remove a lot of the woody debris, a lot of the human debris, but then also a lot of the woody debris. And that debris was stockpiled. Unfortunately, it was not just some of the woody debris that was generated from the event, but in a lot of cases, it was also living trees that were cut down from our stream banks, unfortunately. And as you can imagine, we'll talk a little bit about what makes stream banks stable. And of course, living vegetation is number one thing. If we can get something growing there, that means it's got roots and it's going to help hold soil in place. But but also woody debris, also logs and things that float down the river that get lodged into place naturally. This forms a natural level of protection and helps kind of hold stream banks in place naturally. So there was a little bit of a disservice done by definitely removing living vegetation, but in a lot of times, even some of the woody debris that was helping to hold things in place, that could have led to destabilizing areas as well. So the challenges persist. Like I said, so we've got a lot of material that does not have a lot of structure. It's depositional material, sand and silts. And this material in some cases is, feet tall. In other times, we see areas around bends where it's scoured down to cobbles, and so just no topsoil remaining at all. And then, like I said, some of these gullies forming. So now that we've got some depositional material, new material, not a lot of structure, not a lot of vegetation growing, so not a lot of roots to help hold it in place. Every time it rains, some head cutting is happening into fields, and so you see that material finding the rain finds these little channels, and as soon as you have a preferential flow path, you see water falling off, especially we've got like a sheer face of a bank. And then the power of that water falling and hitting the base eats back into itself. And that's what forms these things that we call head cuts. And so you can see a good example of that in the picture in the top right of the screen there. And of course, it's hard to grow things in a lot of the depositional material, the eroded areas. And so again, this presents challenges that persist throughout our watersheds. So a little bit let's think about like what makes stream banks stable. So first off, let's talk about slope. So a very gradual slope is going to be more stable than a vertical slope. And so when we put a little bit of boundary here, when we think about the slope of that stream bank going from the water's edge up into the floodplain, we're really going to be looking for a stable slope, and that's going to be a 2-to-1 or greater slope. And so that means for every 2 feet that it goes horizontally, then it rises 1 foot. So if you've got a stream bank that's 4 or 5 feet tall, you really need that to be going out 8 to 10 feet in order to have some sort of stability in that slope profile. Anything more steeper than that, you're going to have gravitational erosion happening, and that just again kind of poses threats to the land and can continue to recede as that gravitational action's happening. It is also hard to grow things on slopes that are steeper than that, and so again, you're kind of not able to get that natural regeneration of vegetation happening when we've got steeper slopes. So looking for a gradual slope, 2-to-1 at the very steepest, and 3 or 4-to-1 being more preferable. Another thing that makes stream banks stable, riverbanks stable, is resistance. And so if you think about the goal here is when the flow is coming through the channel, through the river, we want the stream bank to be able to resist that erosive flow. And so what provides resistance is vegetation or rock, right? So when we think about vegetation, kind of in this picture, we see just the amount of roots and biomass that is there. So every time the river comes up here, it's going to be this bank is going to be held in place with all that vegetation, all the roots, and that's going to provide natural stability to this bank. When the flow is really high, sometimes vegetation cannot be as strong as it needs to be to resist that level of flow. So that's where some sort of rock cover will be needed to provide the stability or the resistance that's needed. So those are the two things that we have to work with here. And
Andrea,
yes,
sorry not to interrupt you, but we had a question come through and I wanted to address it before we moved on.
please,
Um,
yes.
I think Tim has a question about how do we want to change slope. He says that they noticed the river is deeper at the edge. You used to could walk out and it was about 2 feet. Now it drops off over 6 feet. And I've seen similar types of instances, and that was actually a question that I was thinking of, we have people that have physically lost ground to this and they now have a very steep bank when they didn't before. So how
Right.
would one correct that?
Yeah. So, of course, the classic answer is it depends, right? So we'll talk a little bit about looking at the river and where your bank is in relation to kind of the bends or the sinuosity of the river itself. And so if you're kind of on an outside of one of the bends, those steep banks are kind of naturally characteristic there because that's where a lot of the sinuous energy is hitting the the bank, hitting that valley floor, and then it's going to wind back, right? And so just that sinuosity lends itself to having kind of steeper banks on the outside of the bends. Now, so if that might be what is maybe causing some of the steepness there, and if that's the case, then you might to create the slope, um, you would you if you're not in that outside bend, and even if you're in the outside bend, I mean it's all about grading and grading that material back to that stable slope. If you're in the outside of the bend, it might be more about bringing in more of the resistance, more of the rock. I'm going to talk a lot about um, being on the preference of bioengineering and vegetation where it makes sense. But oftentimes, if you're in an area where it is deeper, it sounds like you're in a pool. And so that pool is usually on a bend where if you're on the outside of that bend, you're going to have kind of the max kind of power of that stream hitting that bank. And so in that situation, you might need to provide that 2-to-1 slope, but with some protection, that toe rock that we'll talk a little bit about. So to provide the slope, I mean, it's going to be about grading it back and getting to that stable slope. So you've got something to work with in terms of planting and not having that gravitational loss all the time. I hope that answered the question. And when we're talking about, again, when we're talking about the bank, we're talking about from like that kind of like ordinary water line up. So we're not talking about getting down into that deeper part, right? So we're not talking about below the water line. All right. So yeah, so a lower slope bank, particularly where you're in like the straits of the meanders, um, providing resistance in the bank using vegetation or rock, and then finally, what makes the stream bank stable is protection of that stream bank. And so to do that, having some access to a floodplain. I know in some areas that depositional material has just really walled you off. Unfortunately, again, bringing it back, creating what sometimes is called like a floodplain bench right along the river will help kind of alleviate some of that power and that erosive energy. So having the river be able to get out onto a floodplain as soon as water kind of breaches the top of the bank, that's when the energy starts to dissipate. And that's where the floodplains are really important to help kind of take down that stream power and take down that erosive energy. If rivers and streams don't have access to a floodplain, then they're just going to keep on having all that energy constrained in a closed, a tighter channel. So looking to see if there's ways to get more into a floodplain area, alleviating that power of that stream, and then and then establishing and maintaining vegetated buffers. So we've probably all heard about what riparian buffers are, but it's a great practice to not only protect your land, having vegetation, tree roots hold that bank into place. But again, it helps to kind of filter out whatever's coming off of the landscape into the water and protecting the water quality as well. So low slope resistance, and then protecting that stream bank with some vegetation. All right, so let's look a little bit at the anatomy of a stream bank so that when I talk about the interventions, we're kind of on the same page. So here we're looking dead on at a relatively short stream bank now in hindsight. Before I used to think this is a really tall stream bank, but now given some of the scenarios I've seen recently, I'm like, oh, this is nothing. All right, so here is a stream bank, and when I talk about like protecting that toe, so this is the where the water is interacting most frequently with the stream bank. So right at that water intersection, um, so the bank emerges out of this toe. This is the most vulnerable spot for the stream bank, actually. So as you can imagine, when the rain comes, the streams and rivers rise, that energy is really kind of directed at the toe of the stream bank. And so if you get undercutting and that toe is not stable, then everything above it then is going to be falling into the flow of the water. So protecting the toe is something that's really important. Um, Going backwards. All right, then the face of the bank. So think about this as that kind of sloped area that we were just talking about, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, that sloped face. And then keep on pressing the wrong one. And then the bench. And that's kind of that riparian floodplain or buffer area. So where the water's out onto that floodplain area. And so kind of three little things that I like to think about when I think about having a stable bank is, protecting that toe, covering the face, making sure that there's vegetation or something there protecting it, and then buffering the bench. And so creating a riparian forest or some sort of thick vegetation on that in that buffer. All right, and so here's kind of an example of what that toe protection looks like using some rock. And so here we see, during the kind of normal flows, hitting that toe is going to be protected as the stream rises and that energy increases at the toe. It's going to have greater resistance. And then on the face itself, you can see that we've reestablished some willows and silky dogwood. And I could talk all day about the plants that would be great to plant along riverbanks. And so, of course, this is vegetation that can take that fluctuation of the river itself. And then you can see we've got some floodplain happening there as well. So when we talk about some of the interventions, there's kind of this spectrum of interventions that range from the hard armoring through more vegetated practices, bioengineering, to natural regeneration. And so when we think about, what is best for your property, what is best for a scenario, some things to consider is, what is the use of that stream bank or river bank? How stable does it need to be? If I'm working on a bank project and there's a culvert or a road, obviously that infrastructure needs to be protected and the river needs to hopefully stay in place as much as possible. And so you're going to see that's on the hard armoring side of things. When we think about natural regeneration, this is obviously very low input. So this is where we're just kind of letting nature revegetate and stabilize itself. And I talked about grading, and really what we're doing with the grading is kind of nudging nature to where it's going to probably eventually get, sort of, but kind of preventing as much land loss as possible, because nature's just by gravity going to be taking that soil, especially if you've got a vertical bank, and it's probably going to be eating into your property. And if we can get it to a stable slope and stabilize it with vegetation and some of these other interventions, then we're not going to have as much eating into the landscape. Um, and and in some cases, especially where we have kind of low velocities, low stream power, kind of a more stable situation, then this natural regeneration is probably the way to go. Nature knows best in a lot of ways, and just letting natural vegetation kind of come back. And we'll talk about some challenges that might persist there. I live in this middle zone quite a bit with bioengineering. And you can see here in this picture, this is, again, what in hindsight is kind of a relatively low stream bank. But you can see that we've used some toe protection there, and that's something that's called a coir fiber log. So it's a biodegradable erosion prevention product that you can actually purchase and put it at the base of the toe. And then we've used some live stakes and different seed mixes to reestablish vegetation on that bank face after we graded it to that stable slope. And so you can see where when the stream rises, we've got the toe protection and that bank covered with a nice stand of vegetation. So again, some things to consider here when you're thinking about what might be good for you is, how stable does it need to be depending upon your use and infrastructure that might be there? What resources do you have available to you? And then also, where are you kind of in that sinuous path of the water? And that helps us understand the stream power that we're dealing with, because again, vegetation is going to have a limit, and once that limit in terms of velocity and kind of shear stress that velocity of the water poses on the landscape, that's when it kind of needs to get hit into that hard armoring zone. So just a little bit of kind of bird's eye view of what that river meander or stream meander looks like. So all the features here, you can see a river kind of cutting through a valley. We've got a sandbar. You can see that there's a little bit of a sinuous curve here, right? So the helical flow of that river, of that water, just erodes that channel. And on the outside of the bend, kind of on the right side of the lower part of this diagram, you can see that there would be a cut bank. Um, and then that material is actually is kind of kicked up in the flow and then deposited on the other side. And it's that kind of helical action that builds things like your gravel bars, where you pull over with your canoe and you're taking your lunch bar break. And that's, those are built by that helical flow of the water. So it's the digging out that sediment from the pool and depositing it into sandbars, into your gravel bars. And, of course, that's at low flow scenario. Just think about, try to envision your landscape also at those high flow scenarios where everything's kind of connected. The whole channel, the whole valley is full of water, and just kind of think about, where your stream banks are in this diagram to help understand, how much stream power and velocity is this bank really taking. And again, that kind of helps understand, okay, a vegetated practice is probably something that will work here versus, oh, I know I'm at the outside of the bend or really high power area, high velocity area. I might need to bring in something a little bit more beefier with the rock toe. And then, of course, we need to also consider, do we need a permit? So anytime that we're working, inside river channels, of course, that type of activity would need a permit. Anytime we're dealing with a stream bank that's over 50 feet, if we're just doing repair of eroding stream banks and we're using vegetated interventions, then there's this general aquatic resource alteration permit, which is an ARAP permit from the state. And basically, it has a list of specifications, and as long as you're using those vegetated controls, you're just revegetating, then this permit covers your activities. Now, when you start to use hard armoring or that the riprap, the tow rock, that's when you probably need to have a conversation with TDEC and other agencies. I know NRCS uses riprap and tow rock quite a bit. So getting their input on what type of permit is necessary would need to happen. So if you're excavating the banks, if you're just revegetating, like literally just like planting trees or live stakes and not doing any grading at all, then you're good to go. You don't need to notify anybody. But as soon as you're starting to work on stream like over 50 feet and you get the excavation equipment there and you're kind of working on that bank area, then that's where if you're working with vegetation, this general permit, it's $50. It's just kind of letting them know that this is happening. You're working under the specifications of the permit. And then if you're using the riprap or the hard armoring, then that would require a different type of permit. All right, a little bit of a case study I have for us. So, like I said, I've been working here. This is why I'm out here actually outside in Washington County, right on the line with Greene County, Washington County. And we've been working on this farm, trying to demonstrate, what are some practices that can help in this area that has experienced a lot of erosion, a lot of deposition, a lot of sand being deposited in different areas. And the initial response was to recreate the stream bank. And these are some of the photos that happened that were taken before we did any of the work. So you could see this kind of deposited sand material being placed, along where the stream bank, riverbank was, in a very steep slope, right? And so the first thing that we needed to do here was to grade that to a more gradual slope. And so we marked out what was 3 to 4 to 1 slope. And then it turned out that this area, the property owner actually kind of wanted it to be a very gradual slope into the river, wanted to kind of use this area with more of a gradual slope. And so it actually ended up being a little bit more of a 7 to 1 scenario. So you can see on the right side of the picture how the bank looked after we graded it, after it was graded. We did a little bit of plot work. We had access to biochar, and so we did a little bit of a demonstration of, if we put down some biochar, which is this material basically taking woody debris, anything woody, and burning it in the absence of oxygen. It creates this what's called biochar. So it's kind of like charcoal, but even more activated. Has a lot of surface area. It's very durable, so it lasts a long time, and it basically sinks that carbon into the soil and creates a lot of reactive sites for that substrate to hold on to nutrients. And so with the lack of structure and the sand, we wanted to help build soil health as much as possible. And so we had access to the biochar, so we put in a plot that had some biochar laying on it. Of course, we had a lot of wood chips. You probably have seen the mounds of wood chips all around our watersheds. And so we had access to the wood chips, again, a source of organic material. They were degraded over the past, 8 months until we put it out here. And so on 2 of our plots, we decided to, hey, let's amend the soil using some of the woody debris that we have. And so we spread out about 2 inches of wood chips, of kind of the most weathered wood chips we could find. A lot of manual labor happened here. Luckily, I had a good crew helping to rake out some of this. Then we seeded and put out straw. So our seed mix, in the middle of summer, it's pretty hard to get a lot of things growing, but we put down brown top millet with a mix of 2 legumes. We included partridge pea and Illinois bundleflower, which are both native. And since they're legumes, again, trying to fix nitrogen into the soil, improve that soil health as much as possible. And the brown top millet, of course, is a great summer cover. So we really just needed something to get growing, to get those roots and biomass into the sandy deposits. So we put down the straw. And then we put down some coir fiber matting. So this is an erosion protection matting, but it's completely biodegradable, made out of coconut fiber. And so it is pretty high strength stuff. And so it's what you use on stream banks where you anticipate kind of that velocity of water. So a little bit beefier than what you would see just on general like hill slope erosion protection. And again, 100% biodegradable. So the idea is that this stuff sticks around on the slope, helping to hold your seed and your straw and everything in place while the vegetation is coming on. And so this will basically degrade in place over the next 4 to 6 years while the vegetation is coming on. And so we put that out, lots of, again, manual labor, some stakes being driven into the bank there. So some nice slopes. So after we stabilized that slope face, there was a little bit of slope still coming off of the field. And so again, having access to woody material, we put in some mulch berms. And so these are mulch berms, a couple feet wide, about a foot tall. And the producer just, put it in with his little track hoe, bobcat, and just put down buckets to build the mulch berms. And these kind of act very similar to silt fences, but I would say much more effective in this scenario because it it allows water, it slows down the water. So the overland flow that could be very erosive in this kind of non-cohesive material slows it down. So these are little speed bumps for that water. And as sand is being eroded, it hits the mulch berm and it drops out. It's dropping the velocity of the water, dropping the sand as it hits the mulch berm, and then the water is able to weep through it. And so, and then, this is again all biological material, woody material. And so over time, this can just decay in place. The producer can come in a couple of years after vegetation's taken hold and knock it down a little bit if it's still stacked up. But over time, it's just going to kind of degrade into the landscape. And so we have those on contours the rest of the bank up. Just to give you a little bit of cross section, so the blue line is kind of what the profile looked like of the stream bank. Again, very vertical before we did the intervention. And then you can see the other three color lines. Those are looking at that bank slope. So we're at a stable slope, and you can see the two little berms, mulch berms that are at the top of the slope there, helping to so where we get into a little bit flatter situation, we still have some slope. We wanted to, again, kind of slow down that overland flow that was happening. And so that helps protect the bank from any of the rills that could form once it hits that steeper slope. And yeah, so this is one of the mulch berms in action. You can see that we've got some sand being deposited behind it. You can even see the remnants of what was a little bit of a pool of water that was caught during a storm event right before we got out there. And so you can kind of see the mulch berm in action. And yeah, the vegetation taking hold. A couple of weeks later, the brown top millet is very fast to get established, especially with all the rain y'all have been having out here. And this is what it looked like just last week. So the brown top millet coming in, actually going to seed, having some seed heads on it. The partridge pea definitely represented, and a little bit of the Illinois bundle flowers coming in as well. We knew that that was going to be kind of slow to take on, but it is represented. So our next steps on this project, at least, are to continue with some maintenance. We've had a little bit of blowout of some of the mulch berms, so just kind of finding those low spots and keeping them going. We'll put out a winter cover of oats this winter, and then try to work towards our permanent riparian vegetation, which would be some live stakes of our woodies and bare root plantings. Sycamores definitely being at the top of the list for our bare roots, and then with the live stakes, I think we're going to go with some elderberries and silky dogwood and some arrowwood viburnum. And again, I could talk all day about plants. I love the plants. And then putting down a riparian seed mix come late next spring, early summer. And then unfortunately, the water came, the soil sediment came, and then so did a lot of invasive seeds. They're in the seed bank as well. And so we've seen some already on site, we've seen Japanese knotweed being a problem. And so just controlling those invasives. And I think I have some pictures of that here in just a moment, actually. Here's another little bit of a blowout in between two of the mulch berms. You could see some rills happening. And so basically just trying to catch those before they get too deep and that water starts to really carve, and basically just filling those with mulch. Again, we've got wood chips available. They were here, so we're filling it and basically just increasing the roughness so that water has to tumble around quite a bit. And so, oh, I took a picture of that today actually. And I know y'all had 2.5 inches of rain since the last time I did this little patchwork, and there was no rill formed there. So I meant to throw that in here when I took it today. Kind of looking at the toe of the stream bank. Again, some of the little rills kind of forming. So trying to prevent those and get those filled with some mulch as much as possible, just kind of doing some patchwork. And then we've got a big gully that's formed that formed before we started doing our work, kind of in the middle. So that water that's behind the field, it's leaving the field. It's found a preferential flow path, and then these little head cuts are kind of peeling off of it. And so here you can see where we've got our center line gully where we're working on a grade control project there with the NRCS, but you can see this little gully that's kind of offshooting into our mulch berms. Fortunately, it hasn't really toppled the mulch berm, which I think has been pretty impressive. And even today, it still hasn't head cut even further into the mulch berm area, but you can see it's widening as the time goes on. So we're working on a little bit of a grade control to help prevent those head cuts from cutting into the field even further. Like I said, Japanese knotweed. We've got a publication, so check out our guide for the identification and management of invasive plants that are common in riparian areas of East Tennessee. Like I said, Japanese knotweed being the one that I've seen the most prevalent so far. And live staking. So we've also got a publication that can talk a little bit about revegetation using live staking. Can be very economical. It's basically just cuttings from live plants that you in the dormant season stick them into the toe and the bottom of the stream bank into that saturated zone, and it propagates new plants. So it can be a very economic way to get some vegetation going. A little bit of data looking at our plots. We've got some comparisons here. We've got our plot 1 where we had our wood chips, our seed, straw, and mat. Plot 2 is where we added that biochar underneath everything. And then plot 3 and 4, we didn't use any of the wood chips. And just to give you an idea, don't ask me about statistics here, but generally it looks like the wood chips might be helping, spur on some vegetated growth. And then we definitely see in plots 1 and 2 that we have less bare areas. So those blue dots are the count when we did our vegetation um, transects. The blue dots are showing the counts of the bare areas. So we're seeing a denser vegetation where we've put down the chips and the chips in the biochar. So again, we don't really have replicates and we don't have great statistics to be able to prove all this, but again, just kind of getting an idea of what could be helping. So kind of wrapping up a little bit here, some key considerations, is natural regeneration occurring on your site? And if so, what species are coming in, if they're native, if they're helping to hold that soil in place, definitely just kind of keep that going. Maybe make observations of what kind of vegetation is coming in. And if there's a way to either get those species, those bare roots, get some more of those in place this winter, just kind of help that natural regeneration to happen. If you need some level of intervention, what type of interventions needed given the flow path, the energy that's there, the stability that you're looking for your stream bank. And then once you kind of know what that is, what kind of permits are needed and kind of call our partners to start those conversations. And then what resources are available. Of course, we've got some resources that have become available for post Helene recovery of the land. We also have the existing incentive programs that are there through the NRCS, through their various EQIP and CRP programs that would help support some of this work because it is riparian restoration work and conservation work. So kind of think about what resources might be available to you. And if you've got wood chips available, there's definitely some creative ways to use them on site. We're continuing to try to grow capacity for riparian restoration throughout the watersheds. So I've been part of, Sarah and I have both been part of a team of folks, interagency, a lot of folks putting our heads together about, what does stream bank stabilization look like in Cobb County and beyond, and how can we start to see what solutions are out there, what's working, and how can we get more resources and more information about the conditions of the landscape. So this is one of the products that we're working on is a tool that will help kind of get information on the conditions of riverbanks and help us identify where we might be able to put resources because our friends and colleagues at the Division of Forestry have some resources that could be put towards helping public lands. Again, NRCS has opportunities for helping private property owners, farms, and managed forest areas. And then trying to see where those gaps are, where we might need to try to find some more support. And finally, you might be asking, where do I find some of these materials? I've been putting together this kind of database, I guess, map of different native plant vendors, of erosion control products, of life stake suppliers. I've been putting it together for the past few years, kind of related to our Smart Yards program, but I find it very useful for now. And I continue to build it out with vendors and folks who focus on native plants. They focus on life stakes and woody material and construction like kind of erosion protection materials like that coir matting and the logs that I showed earlier. So check that out as a resource. And just to put a little plug before before we open it up for more questions, we've got our field day tomorrow. So if you would like to see some of the work firsthand, please join us here in Washington County. The address is right there on Bent Road here in Limestone, Tennessee. Just a hop, skip, and a jump from most of you all probably. And yeah, we'd love to have you. We are serving lunch with the program. There will be a series of talks in a big tent, and then we will have some wagons so you can jump on and go see some of our demonstration sites throughout the farm that we've been working with. So we'd love to have you tomorrow. We're also going to have about 20 different tables for the trade show and all sorts of folks out here to chat with about some of these challenges that we're facing. So, all right. Thank you all so much for indulging me and listening, and I'm happy to have any more conversations or questions that y'all might have.
Thank you, Andrea, for sure.
Thank you.
Friends who have joined us, what questions do you have? Dr. Ludwig is by all means the expert. I am not. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. Do have a couple of thank yous in the chat.
Oh, great. I appreciate that.
I know from Tim's question earlier, he did add after we moved on that below the water level is the part of the bank that had changed. And when you were talking about stabilization of the toe, would that address that issue?
Um, Probably, yes. The toe protection in kind of an outside cut bank would definitely be part of the intervention. I guess I would also say, you know, like with anything, kind of observing what happens and how kind of nature starts to respond and, over the course of the next year to see if that bank is kind of naturally stabilized. Like a pool environment isn't necessarily a very it's usually the riffle or the rapid water where you see a lot of lateral forces exerted on the banks. And so it might be that even if that bank is steep, there might not be a lot of undercutting that is happening. So just it might be worth it to just kind of, see what happens over the next year or two. And if it really becomes a problem and you start to see, the land disappear, then maybe think about some of the interventions. But it might be worth just kind of, letting nature kind of do its thing and see what happens.
It was a unique spot. Can you
It
hear
sounds
me
like
okay?
it. Yes.
Because it's where uh, a spring runs out. It is on the outside edge, but we have stone all the way around the outside edge. And this is where the stone comes back to woods. And basically, you used to be able to walk out into the river like 20, 30 feet. And now you take one step off and you're over your head. So
Yeah.
it's totally different. But the slope of the bank is still kind of the same going to the water. But then that next step after the toe, you're
Yeah.
deep.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, and again, from not being there to really fully understand, it just sounds like nature's giving you a new fishing hole, maybe. So, yeah.
Pretty much. Pretty
You,
much. It
you
used
might
to be
need
how we
floaties
got
though.
out of the river. But thank you for your time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sounds like you might need some floaties too. Just don't step off the edge. Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Ludwig?
Sarah, this is David Brashears. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And I joined late. I apologize for that. So I did not get Andrea's total presentation, but I do have a question on a creek crossing. Okay. And I have a creek. It's dry bed right now, but on my farm property, and I'm planning on putting in a crossing there with a couple of, probably using some of the PVC culverts, a couple maybe 3 footers. Okay. And what my question is do I need a permit from TDAC, to perform that function?
That is a good question. I am pretty sure the answer is going to be yes. It sounds like is it a perennial stream? Is there water in it most of the year?
Uh, Water in it most of the winter. It is designated as a blue line stream, though. Okay.
Yeah.
So, uh, that's my conundrum. I'll say I have a bridge that's been there for eons, and but I'm gonna have to do maintenance on it.
Yeah.
I'm really not going to ask permission to do maintenance. In other words, we put concrete on it, and it's an old bridge that had wooden structure underneath it, and that wooden structure is getting tarred, and the concrete is sagging. So sooner or later, I'm gonna have to
Mm.
take it down and put a couple in. But that's
Yeah.
more maintenance function rather than I do need an entrance into it across that creek and
Yeah.
make it a little bit wider for cattle
Yeah.
trailers and etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you're going to be kind of disturbing the bed of the river of the creek. And anytime that's happening, that's the habitat that's protected by the state by permit. So yeah, but obviously creek crossings are done all the time. So I know that they've got they they will know how to get you taken care of. And yeah. So so my understanding is that TDEC, a lot of the ARAPs used to go all to Nashville, and all the decisions were made in Nashville. Over the past year, I believe, a lot of those permit riders have been now divvied into our field offices. And so to me, I really like this change because it puts the decision makers and those permit riders, closer to the people who are, needing to do the work and needing the permit, right?
Mm.
So yeah, so I would definitely suggest, give TDEC a call. I know, well, my experience has been that have always been very helpful to try to find what the appropriate permit is, and just take care of the questions and make sure you've got the resources needed to get the permit that's needed.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just add to it that tracks with what I've heard from other producers working with NRCS doing stream crossings. Um, Having that permit, especially if it is a blue line creek, just gives you the flexibility of TDEC saying, okay, we know about that one. So it kind of keeps you out of potential hot water, instead of being a reactive situation.
Yeah.
Well, the regulators are not running up and down the roads, but someone, I'll use the terminology, somebody may rat you out. So
Good choice of words. Yes.
thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions for Dr. Ludwig? Okay. Well, I
Sarah
will
knows how to
not.
contact me, and so y'all feel free to if y'all have any questions come up, yeah, just shoot them towards us, and we'll see what we can do.
I will tell you all, I think there will be a survey pop up when we exit the Zoom. If not, don't worry about it. If it works, please fill it out. We're learning with technology over here. You'd think after a pandemic I would know how to work this, but here we are. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.